Okay, so thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and I hope this is going to be an interesting session. Well, welcome. We are going to talk about devices because it's usually our topic. Nothing. I mean, my name gets pronounced in really different versions. No problem with it. I'm Cristofaro Mune, and I'm from Realize, and we like to work with devices at software and hardware level. And in this session, we're going to do something a bit more specific, a bit more of what is usually called, red teaming. I assume so. And we are going to use vulnerability in devices, which are usually only exploitable from the LAN side. And we are going to show how they can be instead exploited in creative ways and even used for performing lateral movements between different devices. Usually this kind of terms and terminology is applied in corporate penetration testing, enterprise penetration testing, which, let's say, I had some experience, but I would not call myself an expert into. But still, I do happen to see opportunities for an attacker that wants to leverage device for penetrating into such environments like corporates or critical infrastructure. So basically, this workshop is an explanation of the technical details of a few demos that I gave into a recent conference, where I actually took a few LAN-side exploits and transformed them into basically exploits from the one side. Now, let me start sharing the screen. I will just turn off my camera just to steal real estate from the screen. And let me start the presentation and the demo. Oh, actually, and what I have to show to you. 1 second. Okay, you should now be able to see my screen. This is the presentation. And this is a VM where I'm going to just use for slides. I'm going to use a few other settings that we are going to explain during the workshop. Well, basically, it's me and Niek. Niek is also present, although I'm driving this session, and Niek, feel free to jump anytime with consideration and insight, of course. We're both co-founders and security researchers at Realize. It's a company that is active in security of devices and components of devices. In general, well, we have quite some experience at our back. Personally, I've now reached 20 years in security and 15 years exclusively focused on device and hardware and anything that stays in between hardware and software. And Niek, anything to add? Just jump in, of course. But the bottom line is that we have both experience and we like focusing on devices and the security and related topics. You can find more on our research on our blog, of course, and we focus on devices and TEs and, of course, secure boot and fault injection, more on there. The goal of this presentation, well, I would like to discuss a couple of LAN exploits, not necessarily in this order, but first we start from there. Then we discuss a few techniques. One is definitely browser pivoting, and we show how a LAN exploit can be converted into a WAN exploit. It's still a LAN, so it still targets the interface on the LAN side, but there are techniques over which you could bounce around and you could exploit this from the WAN. This is usually a technique which is told, mentioned, and well, today we like to show things. And today I'm going to show you how this looks like and how it is implemented. I will demo, although we will not spend much time because it's a limited time, I will demo lateral movement between devices. So from a compromised device, I will jump into another one, exploiting a vulnerability into the second one. So not necessarily from my PC, but from the second device as well. And we're going also to mention something which has not been demonstrated yet, how the LAN exploit for the Cisco RV340 can actually be used also over WAN. And it's an example where we use, let's say, a compromised device to launch this exploit. So give me a second. Yeah. One moment, I think, yeah, just a moment. I need to stop the sharing. Give me a second. Yeah. Sorry, I had to hide the. Yeah. Pardon me for this inconvenience. So I would like to discuss how to jump over security boundaries. I would like to consider two scenarios in general, a corporate environment where the attacker aims to confidential data, or a critical infrastructure where attacker aims to infrastructure control. So these are the situations where an attacker may benefit of devices in order to bypass security boundaries. These are really interesting and often being spoken about. So in general, insecure devices may always be present in these environments. Because they are often selected for functionalities. I mean, devices are just selected because they just work in many situations, and criteria for selecting such devices are not necessarily security based. The security status may easily go overlooked unless an actual process is in place. I mean, there are many situations where you don't even know how many connected devices you have in an environment, maybe even your home, of course. And let's consider one simple scenario where one old access point is used to temporarily extend coverage. This happens. I mean, you just had one at hand, you just use it. In our target environment, we are going to consider a Cisco RV340, which provides NAT and firewalling. So this is our perimeter, our boundary device. There is, of course, I mean, an example, the data server. I mean, in general, it's something that you would like to attack. We will not go there today. We are interested in other things. There will be a vulnerable device inside in the LAN, basically. There will be a mobile phone which is attached over Wi-Fi to this to the access point. In the end, it was intended to be used as such as just an old one which is in there. And over the internet, there is of course the connection over the WAN, and the only service which is exposed from Cisco, from the router, is the VPN service. We are not going to touch it, although there have been notable vulnerabilities which have been already discussed in Pound 2, and that's basically attacker, which is basically me, in this moment. So let's focus on one moment for the links, the access point. It's old, but once was very common. Would not be surprised if there are still people having this kind of dinosaurs laying around somewhere. In general, it's just an example to show how to convert a LAN exploit to a 1-1, but this was a pretty common one, and also several vulnerabilities got published. In general, this only got one CB assigned, and it's unknown if this is going ever to be fixed. At this moment, not. The CPU is a MIPS, nothing really special here. It's a little endian, and the notable thing is that it's going to have very little memory, flash and DDR, and very little tooling on the device. Literally, you will see that there is almost nothing on this access point. This is what you're seeing, and it's sitting right next to me, and let me show how it looks like. Just a moment. You should be able to see another virtual machine where I'm connecting to the device. So this is a blank username, and this is admin's password. We are just connected. This is how it really looks like. It's really basic, but it did its job done. Nothing really surprising. On the other side, I'm showing you on the interface from a Cisco RV340. I'm saving the configuration here, and the as you can see, this is the running configuration, and this is the version which has been compromised in Pound 2.0. Now, let's continue on our job. The vulnerability overview. Basically, this a vulnerability which has been published in 2010. Plus, there's been a Stack Overflow, which we're going to discuss and find together today. And well, the vulnerability is of course, as many devices in HTTP server code, and this allows to give you an RC as root over the Ethernet interface. We're going to see how we can bounce off a connected device because of the HTTP server code. But first, let's have a look at the vulnerability here. Now, I shared a few links for you to download, which is basically the firmware, and for the RV340. And so I can make it a bit bigger. And that has been loaded in the HTTP server, has been loaded in Hydra, and that allows me to point out already a few things. Let's see basically the main function. We are going to start from there and just do a quick walkthrough to the server code. So basically, you can see that here there is just a message you can bind to any address. So hopefully this function is going to have a socket and bind and listen. So this is only creating the socket for connection. Now, at this point, you're going to have some initialization function. This looks interesting, but at this moment, we will not dive into that. But you see that the file descriptor, the accept, is returned. So if while this is true, if we have a connection from anybody, then this piece of code will just get executed, and this is the function which will just handle the incoming request. Now you see a number of interesting things here and there. So it just starts parsing the web page. You are probably spotting vulnerabilities while we're looking at this code. And I would advise you to do that yourself. By the way, this is an old one, but basically when I did that a long time ago, I did not have a decompiler. Only Hydra has allowed access to, let's say, very cheap decompiler. And at the time, my life was done in this way. Like many other people doing security in this moment. So what is relevant here? So there is parsing of the typical format string like get, URL, and then HTTP 1.0. So if you see something like this, you are scanning the first line of an HTTP request. Then there is content length. You really are really surfing through the code, looking for something that may be interesting at some point. There are several things that hints of vulnerability, like string searching and a number of things. But this is not the kind of aspects that you actually dive into when you're looking at the code for the first time. You try to have an idea. You try to build an idea how the code works. So you try to fix a few fundamental blocks. So, for example, now here you have something called MIME handlers. That seems to be connected to the kind of request that you get out. So if we actually look at these MIME handlers over here, they are basically, after a bit of reversing, you can find that they are a structure, and they work more or less like this. So let me find the structure from reverse, which I've created, and this is the structure. So basically, structure is actually a 6-pointer of 32 bits. The first is the page that you have requested, and then the MIME type that is being assigned to it. This is not really relevant for us, not even that. This is the function that is being used for responding to your request. And this is the function that is really needed for authentication, okay? And this is the function we'll look at afterwards that actually parses your input for that specific request. Now, what we're seeing here is that here we have an authentication handler. We just dive into it. And wow, already you see that there is a fixed password already for that specific request. So what was that? It's a debug command page.asp. Okay, so basically, if I go into my and that should be it. It asks me for another authentication, which is not the one that I'm using. That's interesting. So it seems that this page actually uses something different. So now let's try to use the credential from here, Gemtech and Gemtech SVD, and in order to access it, let me go this way. So it's Gemtech. And now I get something which is actually interesting. So maybe we should look into this code. What is this? If you just type, you get a command. So it's a beautiful debugging interface that people have left over there. So in principle, we should have already execution as root. So this should be basically easy. There is no ID command, so I don't even know if it's root or not. But now if I go back to my initial page and just reload it, it asks me again for the authentication. So this means that if you look at these two authentication, one for this debug command page and the other one for, you can see them here, for example, for us page in general, or CSS in general, or if you ask for any GIF or any other request, they all use this same authentication function. Yep, this is not recognized as a function, not a problem. We just make it a function. And this is not really readable because it needs to be reanalyzed for fixing the GOT, the GOT reference. Don't worry, we're not looking into this. The only point is that the function for authenticating everything is this one, is different from the function for authenticating this page, which actually seems to have instead an hard-coded credential. Now, do we have anything else here? Well, if you look at even more, you see that this function is actually used twice. And you can see this by looking at references. And you see that there are basically these two different pointers into man-handler function. Now, what is this? Well, we can actually look very quickly to what the input function does. But I would suggest to do something else and to look it in a different way. So the response function, so the input handler that we have for this request is this one. So when we send a request to debug CGI or debug command CGI.asp, the one that we just sent, this is what is being parsed. Now, this is not really readable. Already, it's really all not easily readable, or not as easy as we can. I'll show you something. So there is already an hard-coded account that allows us to run commands, very likely a root. What do you even want more, Cristofaro? Well, basically, let's see what this function does. There is something already interesting over here. And I was curious to see if these are coded, how these are coded credentials look like in the source code. Wait, do we have source code? Well, kind of, because at the time, the manufacturer had to release the GPL source code, and now this code is not available anymore. That's why I will not share the link for you. But I have downloaded that for you. And if you go into source, let me show you. This is the actual source code that I've downloaded. And if you go to source and then share, there is this file called broccom.c. Now, the function that we are analyzing is this one, CGI command UI debug. Well, we have to take parents for that, and that's clear, but it's really an interesting function I think this is by far, is likely one of the most vulnerable functions I've seen in my life, maybe the most vulnerable. Well, there are 3 parameters. Whatever you send to data 3 will be executed, will kill a process, but there is room for code injection, of course, for command injection, sorry. The same happens over here. So whatever provided in data 2 and in data 1, in principle, should be a command to execute and a log file to generate. But this is so vulnerable that basically everything goes in buff, which is 1024. So basically, if you put all your pieces together, if you actually send the data 1, 2, and 3, and you overflow correctly the target function, you should be able to get code execution. I hope everything is clear until now. So we look at the device, we just poke into it. There is something which is really, really bad from a security point of view. And this didn't get a CVE assigned, so this buffer overflows, but they were mentioned in my advisory at the time. Of course, at the time, I didn't release the exploit for this, but I think it's time that I can actually show you something. So let's see. Now, basically, I have a port buying shellcode. Let me show you how this works. So you have the shellcode. It's a MIP shellcode, which opens a port on 4919. It's a local port. This virtual machine is connected directly to the internal network. So I can actually show you things they would happen in the internal network. So what you see is that I have just created a very simple post request. Really, at the time when I wrote this exploit, I really just pieced things together in a very trivial and let's say brutal way. So you have my request is just a data 1. Which contains the shellcode, which is this amount. It's a bit large. And then after that, we can concatenate the second parameter as data2, which would basically add the jump address to this shellcode. This is just a simple jump to stack address. Again, this was 2010. And yeah, so basically you have this buffer where you actually write data 1 first. What is it? So data 1, which then is concatenated with temp, which comes from this one plus data 2. So basically your data 1 will be here at the start of the buffer, and at the end of the buffer you have data 2. Now, if all goes well and just happen to run it, this should give me a socket connected to 4919. Okay, let's run it. Let's run this this shellcode, the netcat, the IP address. Okay, so basically, and this device really has really nothing. So if you have cut, everything just dies as soon as you disconnect. Now I need to reboot the device. But this device is really, really basic tooling. So there's everything is implemented with BusyBox, which does not even have netcat or anything. So communicating with this device or doing post-exploitation will be quite hard. Now, let's go basically back to our topic. Now, we have an exploit, which is from the LAN. We have demonstrated. Let me reboot the device for now, because we're going to need it. And so we have an exploit, and we would like to use it from one. Then let's go back to the presentation for a moment. I just did the demo. This vulnerability overview, it's just a basic stack overflow. There's really, really nothing, say, strange to it. Apart that it's MIPS, and you need to write MIPS shellcode, which is, questionable how fun it can be. The vulnerability is the HTTP server codes, and this Ethernet interface is not reachable from one. I mean, we are back to our scenario that we were discussing before in our toy example. And as you can see, and as you can see in this target environment, the access point is firewalled by the Cisco. So it's not something you can exploit directly from the LAN, and this should be clear. Now, what can we do? We can definitely do something interesting here, where we can bounce off basically a connected device. And in our example, in our scenario, I do have a mobile phone which is connected, and yeah, let me ensure that it is. Yeah, because when we reboot, we lose connectivity, of course, to the device. And okay. Yeah. Mobile phone is connected, and I confirm that. So we can bounce off a connected device. Okay, we need to. We actually can do in a browser pivoting. Basically, the HTTP server is actually vulnerability. It's triggered by HTTP request. There's really nothing special to it. We just send really a post request. So anything that can send the post request can actually trigger the vulnerability. And of course, in general, we have several ways of asking a browser to generate such request. Well, we have iframe, image tags, and so on. We have JavaScript, we have XML HTTP requests, and so on and so on. So basically, we may be in the position to tell a browser, please do this, this, and that, and exploit the vulnerability on my behalf. Now, this scenario is usually not so much considered because, of course, you have cross-domain scenarios. So this means that in order for the security policy for cross-domain request, you're not allowed to receive the data from a website which does not follow the request does not follow the enforced policy at the moment. So basically, if you are asking a web page or from a web page to load data from another website, well, this is not doable since who knows how many years. But the point here is not receiving the data. I mean, if you look at the exploit, there is no data that we need to receive back. We just need to trigger the vulnerability, send the payload, send the offset, and just execute that, right? So the browser does not really need to receive any response. So this is a perfect scenario when you want to do browser pivoting, because an important thing is the following: the request from this web browser to any domain will actually go out under certain, let's say, limitation. Of course, the request will go out. It's just that you cannot receive the response, but the request from your browser to an external domain will definitely go out. Now, in this case, we can actually leverage this request in order to trigger this vulnerability. We just don't care that we cannot read the data back. So even if there are a few limitations here, a browser may trigger the vulnerability. Of course, there are more limitations, but let's stay with this concept for a moment. Let's say that we can ask a browser to do the request that we just did from our exploit. We can use JavaScript and all these things. And I'm going to demo that in a moment, but first allow me to do some, explain the scenario. So the scenario is that my mobile phone, which is actually here and actually connected to the access point, you receive a Twitter DM with a shortened URL. Now, this DM is going to say, hey, Cristofaro, there's a link. I mean, there is, of course, a bit of social engineering, of course, but it's just to show you that this allows you to exploit a LAN vulnerability. If you are able to bounce in any way from this device, this is just a nice addition. So basically, this will resolve the URL in our scenario because it's just a shortened URL, as you can see. Yeah, it's writing. It's a shortened URL, so this is going to be resolved. And then you get the answer back. You receive the actual URL. Your mobile phone requests a malicious web page, which is under my control. Then it serves a malicious web page, which has JavaScript and so on. And this will execute code that will exploit the device and will give me a reverse root shell. So there are a few elements which are relevant in this part, of course. I mean, the Twitter DM is probably the least interesting one. There is one thing to say, though, for shortener services, which is interesting. This shortened URL is actually a private IP, a private URL with a private IP. In principle, I mean, there is a little use case for having a shortened URL for an address, which is a non-public IP. So maybe we could discuss if such shortening links have an actual real use case and so on, but they may be quite useful for in such episode of social engineering and so on. Okay, so now let's look at for a moment at the code that I have implemented for doing this. Now, let's have a look at the page that I'm serving here. The page that I'm serving here is this one. Now, what you're seeing is we are exactly doing that. A bit more space. So we have now a connect back shell code is going to be to this server, so 270 port 4919. Okay. So what are we doing? We have a number of, this is the original shell code. We need to parse it a bit. So we need to replace a few functions. So I just performed an overwrite of the prototype for string. Well, actually I've added a few methods over here for string. And I just formatted the shell code in a way that it looks nice in a web request. There's really not much rocket science over this. I mean, you can do this nowadays with much better tooling that I had implemented at the time. So what I'm going to do is, there are a few limitations here. There are some techniques, of course, that may work depending on the browser and so on. In our case, we are using Firefox just for the sake of demonstrating the exploit. So basically, my Twitter application will open the link that I received over Firefox. And Firefox will receive this JavaScript, and this JavaScript will, using an iframe, is going to connect to the vulnerable IP and then send a few commands, which are, this is the post, the URL, the debug.cgi, and then there are to login bytes, the data and so on that we are sending. And then we are actually now submitting the post here. And what you see actually, we are going to send, this is just a function that will send a vector of commands, so I can actually send more than one. And in this case, I'm just sending only one single command here with I equals 0, which is basically the shell code. And JShell, the function, is only doing some formatting in order to replace the /XX with percentage. This is just to make it digestible to an HTTP request. Nothing really special over here. So I'm really, from JavaScript, I'm really doing a post request. I'm sure that you guys can do this much better than I did at the time. And there is nothing really special. The only thing that needs to be applied is that, well, your shell code before did not need to contain only the, let's say, null bytes, right? Well, now it may not contain all HTTP, let's say, delimiters and special characters like the ampersand or like even the semicolon in some cases, depending what you're doing. So now writing the MIPS shellcode from just without a null byte to a shellcode that can be sent just by replacing things around, so just by reformatting. A shellcode that can be sent over HTTP request is a completely different challenge. This is not the right, let's say, environment or setting to discuss it, but going from a null byte only MIPS shellcode to, let's say, a fully compatible HTTP, fully HTTP compatible shellcode, that has been quite a challenge. Maybe another time we will discuss about it. But at this moment, that shellcode can actually be sent by simple formatting. That is probably the most challenging part of this exploit, but there is nothing really special over here. Okay. So basically, this is the page we're going to do it. We are going to see it on the mobile phone, if all goes well. And at that point, this actually send what? Send a shellcode that is a connect pack to the attacker over port 4919. Now, what do I have here? I do have, let's say, a program which I will also need for the rest of the presentation. So basically, this is just implementing a netcat at this moment, and it's just waiting for reverse shell. Now, if all of this goes well, and I hope so, fingers crossed, because I'm doing this actually really live. Last checks. Yeah. Now, if all goes well, I'm going to click on this link and we should see the page that I've just mentioned. And we're going to wait for reverse shell. Let's see. Let's be brave. Okay, that's good. That actually worked. So what you've seen now is actually this. And this happened just because, someone clicked on a shortened URL. And we got the connect pack from this guy. Okay, so what do we have? I'm not going to play much with this because I actually need it for other reasons. So I do have LS. So this is what we have. I don't even have ID. Netcat is not even there. There's really, really little things. So which is not even there. If you look for grep, good luck. Oh, that is there. And we find, we add it. Okay. So it's really, really limited. And there is not much that you can do. So let's assume that you take control of this device. What can you do with it? Well, probably you need to find a way of getting binaries over there. Well, vget is there. So this is something that we can definitely use. Do you have curl? Yeah. So we may have some room, of course, but we don't have an easy way of asking vget to generate, let's say, whatever arbitrary payload we may need in the moment. But at this moment, we are now connected from this guy into this device, and we have bypassed the perimeter just because someone was connected to this to the device. And of course, you can entice anybody to, say, visit a web page or anything. There are for sure better ways of doing this than I did, and there are definitely social engineering experts. But just this allows you to exploit a LAN-side vulnerability from one. I will stop now. If you have questions or anything you would like me to cover, I'm just having a look at the chat now. Okay, all good. Then I will leave the page here still connected, so we don't lose the connection because we're going to need that for a moment. Now, what are the limitations of this technique? Well, there are a few. First, if you rely on parsing responses from the target, this does not work. It's not something that you can use. So if you have one-shot request over HTTP, yeah, this is a very good candidate. On the contrary, should you need to receive data, this doesn't work. Second one is that this has the advantage that you bypass all the proxies in between all these things. So this is really something that will allow you to enter into a perimeter, just completely ignoring the fact that there are firewall proxies and all these things. Because this device, in order to reach the internet, is actually already configured in order to do so. So you are just leveraging that connection. Of course, it's still questionable whether a device has any, has any need to connect over the internet. I mean, really, there is no need why the WAP access point, the access point, should connect over the internet. It should only connect to a website where it can receive updates, and that's it. So this may be, say, in a very well-guarded network, this may be not easily doable, but still you would be able to get control of the device and to be able to run code. So maybe you don't get the reverse shell, but you're able to run code on the device, which already gives you some a foothold in the network. Now, once we are there, we are in the, we have control of the access point. In principle, we could use, we are already in the network. There is no need to bypass again the parameters, so the perimeter, sorry. We are already in, and we can use that for doing lateral movements. Keep in mind that at this point, our control is really limited. So we will probably need to extend our own control on the device, and then probably to find another good target. Now, for this workshop, I would like you to analyze another LAN-side exploit. I'm pretty sure you have downloaded the firmware for the Cisco RV340 LAN-side, the vulnerabilities. And basically, they already have been identified during the pound to on. And here in the presentation, you find actually links that will point to the different CVEs. Multiple have been identified with CVEs by the participant to the pound to on. For example, two notable ones are allowed to perform the authentication bypass and perform command injection as user. Not a problem there. It was basically really easy. We're going to look into them a bit more. And then there is an additional vulnerability which allowed command injection as root. Well, in principle, it's for authenticated user, but what is authenticated is something to be seen, right? You may be authenticated without necessarily knowing the password of a device. So becoming authenticated in different ways. Now, what we're going to discuss today this is the target device, is something to get to our overall compromise. We want to do a lateral movement. So what could be the attack plan? We can actually do the lateral movement by exploiting those vulnerabilities of our line interface from the access point that we just compromised. Basically, we could set the access point as a pivot, and the point is you cannot really do much from there, because in order to exploit this vulnerability, as we're going to see in a moment, you're going to need much. You're going to need a format request. Your post needs to be quite elaborated. So let's say maybe using the vulnerability, you could concatenate many scripts for doing that. And you could have your web page that you've just used for exploiting the access point, concatenate multiple commands. And if you do so, you would be able to maybe exploit this in this way. But let's try to find a more general approach that allows us to discuss basically what would you do once you have such a device in place in order to exploit the LAN vulnerabilities from another device. The point is that now that we are in the access point, we can now interact with the LAN interface directly. We can interact with anything connected to the device, including the router. For example, over here, I will try to, let's hopefully Otherwise, I need to do the exploit. But in principle, I could do this and see if the router, in principle, I could send this command and see if the router is actually alive. I can try. Maybe I need to do the exploit again, but let's leave it aside for the moment. But you can, once you are there, you can exploit, you can use the device. What is the difficult part here? The difficult part here is that you need to immediately try to find a way of making your control of this device more stable. At this moment, we just have a connection. If it just goes down, I mean, we don't have any more control of the device. It's basically gone. We don't have persistence. And this is because basically it's just, say, a web page exploiting the device. It lasts really a few seconds maybe, and that's it. Not sure if you're going to have a second opportunity. So whatever you do here, it needs to be very well prepared. So that's why I'm not even sure that if by pinging in this way, the device will actually hang, and then I need to do the exploit again. Let's leave it aside for the moment. But this allows to interface with now with the LAN interface, with the internal network directly. So basically, there are interesting vulnerabilities in the Cisco that we are going to look at together now in the Cisco router. One that allows you to execute stuff as a user. So basically, you have an authentication bypass. So you can reach some pages, in this case, by using a probe input is just really a web traversal vulnerability. So basically, you can escape a number of things, and the path to that target is not authenticated. Now, with this, you can reach another web page, still not authenticated, but you can inject command because it is a command injection. And if you combine these two, we are definitely going to execute commands as user. And I'm going to show you this now. Now there is a third vulnerability which allows to run commands as root. We are going to chain all of them. And as usual, I'm going to show you this exploit from the LAN side. Interestingly, the exploitation that I have applied for compiling this is not something that has been released yet. I'm thinking to release that as a Metasploit module. And basically gives you directly root from LAN. Not that it cannot be done, but it's something that could be, or not that it cannot be done already, but something that could be interesting to have a look at. But today we're going to have a peek at what I'm doing. So let's first see in action. And we first need to see how can we do it. And but I first would like to look at the vulnerabilities together. Now, we still use our VM. And as you can see here, we are already connected. The session is time out. So this allows us to try exploit and do a number of things. And let's go first to the exploit that I implemented, because it's basically easier. Now, as you can see here, you have there is lots of code, but the bottom line is the following. So if you set the cookie to this one, in this way, you actually have an authentication bypass. You can actually reach other pages without doing authentication. As long as there is a session ID, it's there, it's perfectly fine to do this. And in order to do so, while you do so, basically you can actually do a file upload where you can actually inject a destination, and this allows to run a command as user. This is basically the vulnerability. So we are doing a request, and this is already something public as an exploit. So I would advise you to have a look at this. And by chaining this request, we are going to execute the command as user. Now, the command as user that I'm going to run is just opening a telnet on port 4242. So let me just Let me just focus on the user side. We just run and get execute a command over there. I'm opening the telnet as user 4242. Okay, now let's run this. Okay, now if all goes well, we should have, yeah. So basically we just spawned the telnet in the device, which is of course not generally available. What we can do here, we can do a number of things, and we can note something relevant for the rest of the exploit, basically, or of this path. So we have this exploit that allows us to run commands over the device, of the Cisco device. What does it entail to? It's just a command where you need to send a single post request. Do we need to have to parse the response? Well, actually not. So in principle, I would have just used again in the same configuration as before, with the same technique as before, in order to open a reverse shell already. So, and use this vulnerability, which is just tagged as a LAN-side vulnerability. Well, if you have a reflection point in the network, as we discussed, you can actually have this vulnerability directly executed and from one by bouncing off a connected device. So we could already do this because the response is not really relevant here. But let's try to continue a bit. Let's try to get through and see then at the end of the path, how do we get there? And if that is still suitable for, let's say, a reflected for browser pivoting. Okay. One important detail here is that there is something between the two vulnerabilities that is relevant. So the injection as root only works if you are authenticated. But how does a Cisco device determine if you are authenticated or not? Well, as you have seen, so if you go into TMP web session, so there is this file called session, okay? And this file called session tells me that there is a Cisco user which is authenticated now and so on. And this is in a 10th web session. And indeed, we are definitely connected over here. Use this. Now, what happens if we remove the session? And we try to go over this, go again to the device. Well, the device recognizes me as not connected anymore. So that token is a session token that is where the device stores the information that someone is connected and so on. I mean, there is a base 64, let's say, encoded string. And basically, this will tell you which client is there and which user has been connected and what is the list time. But if you actually delete that, then you would be, you just would disconnect anybody else. But we are user and we have just disconnected root. That's interesting. And if you look at the permission for the file in the directory, we are, according to the previous exploit, we are exactly someone that can first delete this file and also can craft this file. So this means that with these, we could actually craft a fake session, which is something that we do here. We just don't execute telnet. We just create a fake session. Now, let's run this exploit again. We're still only using the user command here. Good. And now, if all is well, the session should have been created, which is indeed what we what we suggested. Now, this means that now the device thinks that whatever this user is doing and so on is authenticated for all purposes of the device. So this means that we are considered trusted and we can access some other APIs which otherwise we would not be able to access. And one of those is the one where it is vulnerable. The other one that is vulnerable and is only accessible after you are authenticated. You may remember this one, which allows to inject command as root for authenticated users. So we are considered authenticated, although we never been authenticated in practice. We just pushed a session ticket. Now, if I enable also the root exploit is going to, if you look at the payload, is going to start spawn a telnet on port 2304. Now let's see how basically how this looks like. If all went well, I should be root. And actually, this connection is pretty persistent. Of course, being telnet is just a daemon that goes there. Now, the question is that this technique will be applied. I mean, it's pretty easy. We just have to figure out a few inner working of the system. But it all involves only HTTP requests. So it's another candidate in principle for applying the same technique as before. Do we need to parse anything back? Well, in principle, not really, because we just need to send some session. We are not waiting for any response. This is a session ticket. And the command rejection as user is still another request. So we don't really parse data here. We have no need for parsing data. So in principle, also this one could be exploited in the same way as before. And also, there is not even a shellcode needed. There is not even any specific binary that you need to inject. It's just a really simple command injection. But we wanted to do this performing a lateral movement of device. This is a bit different and so on. So are there questions on the exploit? Okay, no, Okay, then at this moment, we do have a root shell from the LAN side. So whatever you see on this virtual machine is from the LAN side. Okay, now we would like to implement these calls sent by the access point, but there is not really much there. So the first thing that we need to do is to push some tooling. So this means that we need to leverage our shell that we got on the device for pushing tooling, for sending commands like, hey, download this stuff, this binary. For example, we could download a compiled BusyBox where we have enabled netcuts and other features, and we have many more commands available. There is also another point which is important. These requests are actually happening, especially the one that I mentioned, over HTTPS. And probably we would have done this differently, but I wanted to tackle one challenge. I do have only netcuts on the device. How can I establish an HTTPS connection from the one if I don't have a suitable proxy over there? Now, I found a way which could be interesting to share. And now let's look at the kind of exploit of what I'm doing, what I'm pushing to the device. We'll do that in a moment. We need to push. We'll establish tunnels because we need to talk to HTTPS in the settings that we have been discussing until now. And also, we can now interact with the line interface, or everything connects to the line interface directly. So basically, if we can interact, so if we can push tooling, establish tunnel, then we can basically do exactly the same that we did. So it all entails to having this guy working as a dumb proxy talking to the Cisco device. Again, this is only maybe netcuts, not even that. You don't have much. And why you cannot push whatever you want? Well, because the flash on this device is really tiny. If I remember correctly, you have something in the order of 40K of flash available, 40 kilobytes, and that's it. There's nothing more. So you cannot go with exotic things or static or OpenSSL or OpenSSH and things like that. This is really need to be really minimal. And the most minimal configuration that I was able to figure out was, well, download a netcut here, which will join two normal TCP socket to tunnels over here. We'll just establish a tunnel over netcut here and is connected to the tunnel over netcut here. Not a netcut to what? Well, I do a netcut to the port 443 of the device. So I connect through netcut to the HTTPS port of the device directly. Of course, this only establishes the socket, but does not complete the SSL handshake. But now, at least I have some sort of a pipe. And this pipe allows me to talk to the device. Let's look at this in code again. So this is the program that I started here, and is just listening over connection. And as you can see now here, in main, which is here below, we just wait for an interactive socket from the access point. If you look at inter, you just really spawn a listener. There's nothing more. So this is just only listen over connection from the vulnerable access point, which has just been exploited. Good. At this moment, we need to send things to the target. We need to send a few tooling and to establishing a tunnel. So basically, in this case, what we're doing is, again, let me look at the picture. While this, you have two netcut tunnel here, this is going to establish an HTTPS connection over this tunnel. How do we do it? But it's very easy, basically. We are going to have a socket tooling, which is just listen on one socket over here, and the other one connects over HTTPS over here, over the tunnel. Now, let's see what we do here. So basically, what I'm doing now is, 1 second, it's not really visible. Yeah, so basically what I'm doing now is that I'm starting on my machine as an attacker, just a connection. Which will connect basically between connect. It will connect to my port on. I open up a port on 8080, and it will connect directly to an SSL port still locally. So now there is also a tunnel which goes from this port and goes over HTTPS. You see OpenSSL here. That directly goes to where? One moment. That directly goes to the access point. So I'm establishing a tunnel with socket on top of the netcut dump tunnel. Now, after this is done, what I need to do, once the tunnel is up, I just need to run exactly the same thing that I did over the tunnel IP which I have created. So this does exactly what we did before. But now, instead of having an IP that you actually target, the IP is going to be the tunnel endpoint that I just set up. Okay. So in the end, this tunnel from my side will have an IP. And to briefly explain it, it's an SSL tunnel over a netcat tunnel. And I mean, if we would have, let's say, Metasploit for this, would be really nice, but unfortunately, no way of doing this on the target device. But this one you can compose with netcat and socket. You can do beautiful things, and this is one example. But once we have an endpoint, the socket, where when we push stuff, is going to go to the access point and going to be proxied to the Cisco router, well, in principle, we should have a root exploit, a root shell, reverse shell. Now, what does the exploit do? So let's go to the actual command that we are using. So the command root that we have done is basically a reverse shell in Python. And the reason is that on the Cisco router, there is Python. So let me make it bigger. And because there is Python, we can actually use this for implementing a reverse shell. So once we are able to execute command as root on the Cisco router, well, basically we're able to have a reverse shell directly with Python in that case. And this is what we're doing. So they will spawn basically a reverse shell of 270 over 31337. Okay, this is what we have. Now, the way we implemented this is just enough that I press Ctrl+C and everything should work as such. So now I'm establishing tunnel. I'm creating the tunnels locally. I'm pushing tools. I'm creating netcuts. I'm bridging those tunnel here because I first created the socket tunnel. Then I'm pushing at the end the netcut, and the netcut is started with the commands. And these actually completely close the tunnels. So netcut over the device has created the dump tunnel, and at this point we are going to have the complete tunnel ready. At this point, once we have the tunnel ready, we actually do exactly the same. We create the web session here, it may not be there. We bypass authentication, we injected the fake admin session, and then we are doing command injection as root. And then we are spawning a root shell as here. So what if I actually disconnect, this will die because it's not a telnet, it's actually, but this has completed basically our explanation of how you could bridge vulnerabilities and across vulnerable devices with different techniques. Now, the first one that we have seen is actually browser privilege. When you can apply in every time you have a request, but you don't need to parse the response. You can apply basically in all situations where you have an HTTP, or in some cases, even just a TCP socket, as long as it understands the HTTP request. Finally, is also useful in all the situations where well, basically you leverage a browser in a way that can be almost invisible. I mean, there are several techniques which say I'm not an expert in, but they would definitely be convenient and applicable to this. Now, the second technique that we have seen is not so much into performing bouncing off the device, but from exploiting one device from another one. Again, like I said, if you have Metasploit on this, is completely another story. This would have been probably a 10-minute talk and done. But we are in the situation and position to encounter devices with very small footprint. Now it's an access point, okay? It could definitely be something like a wireline connection, an Ethernet connection done to power line, sorry. It could be a smoke detector. It could be an access control system or a sensors of that. So there may be a situation where you have connected devices where you may not have the opportunity to use directly the advanced tooling that we love to use. And this shows an example of how just by having netcut on the target, you can, on top of that, build tools, build basically tunnel to whatever protocol you want. I had to take the HTTPS because this was the topic of the exploitation or the vulnerability. But in principle, that works for anything. And of course, there are always limitations. For example, netcut just dies after the connection is finished. So that's why you need to push netcut along with a script that allows you to run it continuously and allows to bridge that tunnel at the dump level. Finally, after seeing these techniques, I think that the whole point of this is to consider a LAN exploit not anymore just LAN exploit. You have several opportunities for exploiting them. At least some, under some constraints, of course. I mean, not everything that can be exploited by LAN can also be exploited in a similar fashion. For example, at this moment, I've not found an easy way of bouncing off a device and exploit a UDP service. Because, I mean, unless you enter in the situation where you want to run, I don't know, Java or WebSockets or things more complex into a browser that may require the user authorization, then your tooling can be a bit limited over there. But I hope that these two examples of pivoting on an actual device allow you to cover several situations in a, let's say, with a better view of the opportunities that you have. We just did the demo. So basically, the bottom line is that we exploited what was on an access point on the device, a LAN RC from the one. Then we did a lateral movement from a compromised device in order to exploit another LAN vulnerability, again from one. So I think this is something that to reflect upon in general. To close our presentation and our workshop, I hope to have much more questions from your side. Not seen many yet. But what can you do once you're on the device? There is another step that we are not doing this. We are not doing that now. The other step is that once you are on the Cisco device and your root, or once you are on a board or on an advanced router or an advanced perimeter endpoint, what can you do? Can you hide there and not be identified? Well, now that you're root, basically, you could even try to explore and compromise a trusted execution environment. This is, for example, something that we did in another device, in another Linksys, by the way. And this allows us to compromise, let's say, a TE in general. But why do we want to do that? Well, keep in mind that many of the secrets that you have are accessible only to the TE code. You have unfettered access to the hardware, and you could actually achieve persistence beyond any detection. And why? Because the memory of a TE cannot be scanned, cannot be accessed by the usual application or kernel or even hypervisor running on the non-secure world, what is called usually DRE. So once you are there and you really want to, let's say, achieve more persistence and become undetected or extract additional secrets or even access the hardware, why? Well, in principle, you could access, for example, directly the Wi-Fi, shared memory with Wi-Fi, send commands directly to the Wi-Fi SOC. And at that point, you may find the vulnerability even over there. So once you are in the TE, basically your access to the hardware is really cannot be stopped by anything. So you have the highest privilege on the device. So it makes sense that once you are root, you start looking into ways of becoming even more privileged and exploitative. Well, I hope this sounds interesting. And if you're interested in how to break trusted execution environments, you should definitely consider visiting us to our training, and which happens in August 2022 with Ring Zero. But I would like to receive now your questions if you have, or any feedback. Feel free even to, let's say, give it with voice. I mean, not only on in written. And I would be happy to answer any questions from your side. Okay, I think there is none. It means that it's either been too complex or too easy, one of the two. Well, I hope that it gives you a few insight on how to look into vulnerabilities when they are marked as LAN-side, or a few ideas how to actually use it, maybe in actual environment, or even just consider the threats associated to this kind of vulnerabilities, because there are techniques that allow to bypass perimeters by using devices, which may be not easily detected, by the way, because the whole point of this discussion is that we for sure, historically, we have developed means and practices and tools that protect systems, the endpoint, that protects infrastructure and so on. But I think that's the path for, let's say, any security posture that takes into consideration the presence of device. Yeah, I think that path is still to be fully completed. So there may be an opportunity for an attacker to leverage techniques that's, well, we just discussed. Anyway, should you have more questions, I mean, just reach out at Realize. I mean, we are definitely happy over email, and on our website, you will find contact form, or just write to us over Twitter. We are certainly open to connecting and to have questions. Thank you very much, Mario. Yeah, we are pleased, and thank you all. If you don't have any feedback or questions, I wish you a nice evening or a nice day, and hope to see you. Hope to see you in the next T-Bound training, or anywhere where you can actually meet. Thank you very much.